wicked princess make him know it and put a spell on her niece, the king's daughter, depriving her of her gravity. But as well as being light-bodied, the young princess was also light-headed and could take nothing seriously at all. Although she didn't mean to upset anybody, it often happened that she did. The princess could float into the air by merely pushing off the ground with one foot and remain there, laughing at everyone who passed below her. Her father, the king, grew more and more embarrassed by his daughter's antics and sought advice on what to do about her strange afflictions from two Chinese philosophers, Humdrum and Copycake. But the cures they suggested were either too outlandish or too painful, and the king, anxious as he was, felt he couldn't subject his daughter to them. Perhaps the only thing to bring her down to earth would be for her to fall in love. But how a princess who had no gravity could fall into anything was the difficulty. But now I come to mention another curious fact about her. The palace where she lived was built on the shores of the loveliest lake in the world. So lovely was it, in fact, that the whole country was called Lago Belle, Lake Beautiful, after it. One summer evening, during the carnival in the country, the princess had been taken upon the water by the king and queen in the royal barge. They were accompanied by many courtiers in a fleet of little boats. In the middle of the lake, she wanted to get into the Lord Chancellor's barge, for his daughter, who was a great favourite with her, was in it with her father. And so, when the barges approached each other, the king caught up the princess to throw her across. He lost his balance, however, and fell into the boat, losing hold of his daughter, but managed to give her a downward push into the water. With a burst of delighted laughter, she fell into the lake, and a cry of horror went up from the boats. They'd never seen the princess go down before. Half the men were in the water in a moment, but they'd all one after another come up to the surface again for breath, only to hear the princess's laugh float over the water from far away. There she was, swimming like a swan, nor would she come out for king or queen, chancellor or his daughter. She was perfectly obstinate and swam further and further away until she reached the far side of the lake and was out of sight of the royal party. It was the first time she'd experienced natural gravity, for the water made her heavier because she became of normal weight and buoyancy, so that she could swim and dive like a duck. The trouble was that once out of the water, her weightlessness would return. The Chinese philosophers Humdrum and Copycake argued that if water could do the princess so much good, water from a deeper source might be the perfect cure. In short, that if the princess could be by any means made to cry, she might also recover her lost gravity on land. But how was this to be brought about? That was the difficulty, and the philosophers weren't wise enough to know how. To make the princess cry was as impossible as to make her weighty. It must have been about this time that the son of a king, who lived 1,000 miles from Lago Belle, set out to look for the daughter of a queen. He travelled far and wide, but as sure as he found a princess, he found some fault in her. In his wanderings, he'd come across some reports about our princess, but as everybody said she was bewitched, he thought no more of her. Late one evening, however, he found himself on a footpath which led him to the side of a lake. Along this path the prince made his way through the gathering darkness. Suddenly he paused and listened. It was, in fact, the princess laughing. And there was something odd in her laugh, though it's difficult to say what. It may have been because she was never serious. Her laugh wasn't as different as other people's would have been from a cry. And perhaps this was how the prince mistook the laughter for screaming. Looking over the dark lake, he saw something white in the water, and in an instant he had torn off his tunic, kicked off his sandals, and plunged in. He soon reached the white object and found that it was a woman. There wasn't enough light to show that she was a princess, but quite enough to show she was a lady, who, whether or not he frightened her, didn't say a word. Carrying her to a place where the bank was only a foot or two above the water, he lifted her out of the lake to lay her on the bank. But Her gravitation ceased the moment she left the water. Away she went up into the air, scolding and screaming. "You naughty, 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 naughty man," she cried. No one had ever succeeded in putting her in a passion before. When the prince saw her floating upwards, he thought he must have been bewitched and had mistaken a great swan for a lady. The princess managed to catch hold of the topmost branch of a lofty fir and climb down it, until, reaching the ground and seeing the prince standing there, she caught hold of him and said, "I'll tell Papa." "Oh, no, you won't," returned the prince. "Yes, I will," she persisted. "What business had you to pull me out of the water and throw me down to the bottom of the air? I never did you any harm." "Oh, pardon me, I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't believe you've any brains, and that's a worse loss than your wretched gravity. I pity you." The prince now saw that he had come upon the bewitched princess and already offended her. But before he could think what to say next, he burst out angrily, giving a stamp with her foot that would have sent her aloft again but for the hold she had on his arm. "Put me in directly." "Put you where, you beauty?" asked the prince, who'd fallen in love with her already, for her anger made her more charming than anyone else had ever seen her. "In the water, you stupid," answered the princess. "How am I to put you in?" he asked. "That's your business," she answered, quite snappishly. "You took me out, you put me in again." "Very well," said the prince, and catching her up in his arms, he carried her quite another part of the lake, where the bank was 25 feet high at least, and when they reached the edge, he sprang with her from the rock. The princess had just time to give one delighted shriek of laughter before the water closed over them. When they came to the surface, she found that for a moment or two she couldn't even laugh, for she had gone down with such a rush that it was with difficulty she recovered her breath. "How do you like falling in?" said the prince. "Oh, it's the most delightful fun I ever had in my life. I never fell before. I wish I could learn. I think I'm the only person in my father's kingdom that can't fall." Here the princess looked almost sad. "I shall be most happy to fall in with you any time you like," said the prince devotedly. "Thank you. I don't know. Perhaps it wouldn't be proper, but I don't care. At all events, as we've fallen in, let's have a swim together." "With all my heart," said the prince, and away they went swimming and diving and floating until at last they heard cries along the shore and saw lights glancing in all directions. It was the servants from the palace sent out to look for the missing princess. It was now quite late, and there was no moon. "I've a great mind to play them all a trick," said the princess. "Why couldn't they leave me alone? They can't trust me in the lake for a single night. Look, you see where that green light is burning? That's the window of my room. Now, if you just swim there with me very quietly, and when we're all but under the balcony, give me a push, up you call it, as you did a little while ago, I should be able to catch hold of the balcony and get in at the window, and they may look for me till tomorrow morning." "With more obedience than pleasure," said the prince gallantly, and away they swam very gently. "Will you be in the lake tomorrow night?" he ventured to ask as they reached the palace. "To be sure No, I don't think so. Perhaps," was the princess's somewhat strange answer. But the prince was intelligent enough not to press her further, and merely whispered, as he gave her the parting lift, "Don't tell." The only answer the princess returned was a roguish look. It seemed to say, "Never fear. It's too good fun to spoil that way." So perfectly like other people had she been in the water that even the prince could scarcely believe his eyes when he saw her ascend slowly towards the window and disappear inside. He almost expected to see her still by his side, but he was alone in the water. So he swam away quietly and watched the lights roving about the shore for hours after the princess was safe in her chamber. As soon as they disappeared, he landed in search of his tunic and sword, and after some trouble found them again. Then he made his way round the lake to a solitary spot from where he could see the green light in the princess's room, and where, even in broad daylight, he'd be in no danger of being discovered from the opposite shore. It was a sort of cave in the rock, where he made himself a bed of withered leaves and lay down, too tired for hunger to keep him awake. All night long, he dreamed that he was swimming with the princess. Night after night they met and swam about in the dark, clear lake, and the prince fell deeper in love with the princess. When the moon came, it brought them fresh pleasure. Everything looked so strange and new in the light, with an old, withered, yet unfading newness. And when the moon was nearly full, one of the greatest delights was to dive deep in the water and then, turning around, look up through it at the great blot of light close above them, shimmering and trembling and wavering, spreading and contracting, seeming to melt away and again grow solid. Then they would shoot up through the blot, and lo, there was the moon far off, clear and steady and cold and very lovely, at the bottom of a deeper and bluer lake than theirs, as the princess said. Her pleasure in the lake had grown into a passion, and she could scarcely bear to be out of it for an hour. Imagine then our consternation when, diving with the prince one night, a sudden suspicion seized her that the lake was not so deep as it used to be. She coasted the rocks, inspecting them closely, but she wasn't able to come to a conclusion, for the moon was very small, and she couldn't see well. So she turned and swam home, forgetting all about the prince, who went back to his cave in great distress. Next day she made many observations which, alas, strengthened her fears. She saw that the banks were too dry, that the grass on the shore and the trailing plants on the rocks were withering away. She made marks along the borders and examined them day after day, till at last the horrible idea became a certain fact that the surface of the lake was slowly sinking. The tops of the rocks that had never been seen till now began to appear far down in the clear water. Before long, they were dry in the sun. The poor princess nearly went out of her little mind. She was awful to see the lake, which she loved more than any living thing, lie dying before her eyes. The princess couldn't bear to swim in the lake any more and began to pine away. Her life seemed bound up with it, and even as the lake sank, she pined. People said she wouldn't live an hour after the lake was gone. But she never cried. Proclamation was made to all the kingdom that whosoever should discover the cause of the lake's decrease would be rewarded after princely fashion. Humdrum and Copycake applied themselves to their physics and metaphysics, but in vain. Not even they could suggest a cause. Well, tomorrow I'll tell you why the lake is drying up, and how the prince comes forward to save the princess. Till then, goodbye.